Anya moved through the sprawling, opulent Lagos mansion like a phantom, her steps silent, her presence barely acknowledged by the Davies family. From the polished marble floors of the grand foyer to the shimmering crystal chandeliers in the dining hall, every surface gleamed under her diligent hand. The air, thick with the scent of expensive air fresheners and Mrs. Davies's imported perfumes, spoke of a world far removed from Anya's cramped single room in a bustling, less glamorous part of the city. To Anya, and indeed to anyone looking in from the outside, the Davies were the epitome of success. Mr. Davies, a man with a booming laugh and an ever-present smile for his business associates, was a prominent figure in the city's elite circles, known for his audacious real estate ventures. Mrs. Davies, always impeccably dressed in designer fabrics, hosted lavish parties that spilled onto the manicured lawns, her social calendar a testament to their perceived influence. Anya had been with them for nearly 2 years, a period that felt both fleeting and eternal. Her days were a meticulous routine, waking before dawn to prepare breakfast, cleaning every inch of the vast house, running errands in the family's chauffeur-driven car, though she was never allowed to drive it herself, and ensuring every whim of the Davies and their teenage daughter was met. She was paid just enough to cover her basic needs and send a small sum home to her aging mother, leaving little left over for the dreams that flickered in her mind. Dreams of a small business, of financial independence, of a life where she wasn't invisible. She often wondered about the true nature of such immense wealth. Did it bring genuine happiness? From her vantage point, the Davies seemed to float effortlessly through life, their problems seemingly trivial compared to the daily grind of survival for people like her. Their conversations, overheard snippets from the kitchen or while clearing tables, were always about new investments, luxury vacations, or the latest exclusive club. Anya, a quiet observer by nature, absorbed it all, filing away details like a diligent archivist. She saw the forced smiles, the fleeting moments of tension that would quickly dissipate when a guest arrived, the subtle shift in Mrs. Davies's voice when she spoke to her husband on the phone, a tone she never used with anyone else. These were minor dissonances in their perfect symphony, easily dismissed by an outsider, but to Anya, they were tiny cracks in a seemingly impenetrable facade. She longed for a life where she could be seen, where her efforts translated into tangible progress, not just the maintenance of someone else's golden cage. The first significant crack in the Davies' meticulously crafted image appeared subtly, almost imperceptibly, in the form of a delayed utility bill. Anya, accustomed to handling all household mail, noticed the final notice stamp on the electricity bill, a stark contrast to the usual prompt payments. She placed it on Mrs. Davies's desk, expecting it to be handled immediately, but it remained there for days, then weeks, accumulating late fees. This was followed by hushed, increasingly agitated phone calls Mr. Davies took in his study, his once booming laugh replaced by strained whispers and frustrated sighs. Anya would catch phrases like, extended deadline, liquidate assets, and just need a few more weeks. The charming businessman was becoming a desperate man, his face often etched with worry lines that even his expensive skin creams couldn't erase. Mrs. Davies, usually a picture of serene elegance, began to show signs of immense stress. Her designer clothes, once seemingly endless, were now repeated more frequently. Her shopping sprees, once a weekly ritual, became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Anya noticed her meticulously counting naira notes from her purse, a stark departure from her usual carefree spending. The lavish parties grew smaller, less frequent, and the guest list noticeably thinned. The grand mansion, once a hub of vibrant social activity, began to feel eerily quiet, the silence punctuated only by the distant hum of the air conditioning and the anxious pacing of its owners. Anya also observed their interactions with their staff. The usually composed Mrs. Davies would snap at the cook over minor imperfections in a meal, her voice sharp and laced with an edge of barely contained frustration. The gardener, a gentle old man named Papa Emeka, was suddenly dismissed without warning, replaced by a younger, cheaper, and less experienced hand. Anya heard snippets of arguments between the Davies about staff wages, with Mr. Davies insisting on cutting corners wherever possible. Anya's initial perception of effortless wealth began to crumble, replaced by a growing understanding of their precarious financial situation. The opulence was a performance, a desperate act to maintain a social standing that was rapidly eroding beneath their feet. She saw Mr. Davies making frantic calls to various banks, his voice pleading, then bargaining, then finally resorting to thinly veiled threats. Mrs. Davies would spend hours on her laptop, poring over complex spreadsheets, her brow furrowed in concentration, often muttering about negative cash flow and insolvency. The expensive cars, once symbols of their success, were now frequently seen with "for sale" signs discreetly placed in their windows, only to disappear and reappear, suggesting desperate attempts to sell them off, likely failing. Anya watched, her quiet observations confirming her suspicions. The Davies were not just struggling, they were teetering on the brink of financial collapse, desperately trying to keep up appearances while their world slowly unraveled. The veneer of the Davies' prosperity continued to crack, revealing the desperate measures they took to maintain their social standing. Anya witnessed firsthand the intricate web of deception they wove. Bills, once paid promptly, were now shuffled, delayed, or outright ignored. She saw Mr. Davies expertly forge signatures on documents, heard him coach his secretary on how to politely but firmly deflect calls from insistent creditors, and watched as he strategically avoided certain parts of the city where he might run into people he owed money. The elaborate parties, when they did happen, were often funded by short-term loans from less than reputable sources, the champagne flowing freely while the Davies internally panicked about how to repay the next day. Mrs. Davies became a master of illusion, recycling outfits, claiming new designer bags were vintage finds, and always having an excuse for why her usual high-end boutiques were just not inspiring her lately. Their financial strain also manifested in their treatment of those around them, particularly their staff and their own daughter. The once polite requests to Anya became curt demands, often accompanied by thinly veiled threats about her job security. She saw the weariness in the eyes of the chauffeur, who was often made to work excessive hours without overtime pay, and the cook, whose grocery budget was slashed to an unbearable minimum, forcing her to compromise on ingredients. But it was their daughter, a bright but timid teenager named Iphioma, who bore the brunt of their emotional and psychological distress. Mrs. Davies, under immense pressure, would lash out at Iphioma for minor infractions. A spilled glass of water, a slightly messy room, a less-than-perfect grade. These outbursts were often public, humiliating Iphioma in front of staff or even distant relatives, all under the guise of tough love or teaching her discipline. Mr. Davies, while less overtly aggressive, would often dismiss Iphioma's concerns or dreams, prioritizing his business woes over her emotional well-being. Anya often saw Iphioma retreat into herself, her shoulders slumped, her eyes downcast, a stark contrast to the vibrant, curious girl she knew her to be. Anya also noticed a disturbing pattern of staff turnover. A previous maid had been abruptly dismissed after a missing family heirloom, though Anya suspected it was a fabricated excuse to avoid paying her final wages. The former security guard was accused of negligence after a minor incident, leading to his immediate termination without severance. The Davies were not just struggling, they were actively exploiting those beneath them, using any means necessary to cut costs and maintain their crumbling facade. Anya, with her quiet observations, began to see the Davies not as successful titans, but as desperate individuals trapped in a golden cage of their own making, willing to sacrifice anyone to keep up appearances. The opulence of the mansion now felt less like a symbol of success and more like a gilded trap, its beauty masking a deep, unsettling rot. Anya's quiet observations sharpened into a chilling understanding. The Davies' financial woes weren't just leading to belt-tightening, they were fueling a systematic exploitation of their staff. She began to piece together a pattern, a ruthless strategy of leveraging fabricated accusations to avoid paying wages or severance. The incident with the previous maid, accused of stealing a missing antique vase that Anya later saw tucked away in a dusty corner of the attic, was no longer an isolated event. It was a blueprint. The security guard, dismissed for negligence after a minor scratch on a car, had been fighting for his final pay for months, his calls now going unanswered. Anya overheard Mrs. Davies boasting to a distant relative about how they dealt with troublesome employees, saving them a fortune in unnecessary expenses. It was a cold, calculated approach to managing their dwindling resources, turning their staff into disposable assets. The exploitation wasn't limited to dismissals. Anya noticed subtle deductions from her own meager salary for breakages that never occurred or supplies that were never purchased. Her monthly pay slip, often delayed, would sometimes have unexplained subtractions. When she cautiously inquired, Mrs. Davies would dismiss her with a wave of her hand, muttering about administrative errors that were never rectified. The Davies were not just struggling, they were actively siphoning off the meager earnings of their employees, essentially making money by shortchanging those who served them. This realization sent a shiver down Anya's spine. She was not just a maid, she was a potential victim, a pawn in their desperate game of financial survival. The thought of being next in line for a fabricated accusation, of having her hard-earned wages withheld, filled her with a quiet dread. The daughter, Iphioma, also suffered from this manipulative environment. Anya often saw Iphioma's personal allowance drastically cut. Her requests for school supplies or new clothes met with sharp rebukes about financial discipline, even as her parents continued to splurge on their own superficial needs. Iphioma was often tasked with running errands that were clearly designed to save her parents money, like picking up groceries from cheaper, less convenient markets, or delivering documents by hand instead of using a courier service. Anya witnessed Iphioma being forced to lie to family friends about their financial stability, painting a picture of prosperity that was far from the truth. The pressure on Iphioma was immense, a silent burden that weighed heavily on her young shoulders. Anya saw the girl's quiet defiance, the way she would sometimes sneak food from the kitchen to give to the dismissed gardener, or the way she would subtly try to help Anya with her chores, a silent act of solidarity. It was clear that Iphioma, despite her privileged upbringing, understood the injustice unfolding around her. Anya felt a growing sense of urgency. She needed to escape this toxic environment, not just for her own sake, but also for the quiet hope that she might one day be able to truly help someone like Iphioma, who was trapped in a different kind of cage. The pieces clicked into place with a chilling clarity. Anya realized she wasn't just observing the Davies' decline. She was a potential casualty. The pattern of exploitation, the fabricated accusations against former staff, the desperate financial maneuvers. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. She was next. She was the next disposable asset, the next convenient scapegoat in their desperate scramble to stay afloat. Her quiet nature, her diligence, her perceived lack of connections, all made her an ideal target. They would likely wait until she had accumulated a few months' worth of wages, then spring a trap, accusing her of some invented transgression to justify withholding her pay and perhaps even demanding compensation from her. The thought sent a cold dread through her, but also a surge of quiet determination. She would not be another victim. This realization sharpened her senses. Every instruction from Mrs. Davies, every casual remark from Mr. Davies, was now scrutinized for hidden motives. She noticed them watching her more closely, their eyes lingering a moment too long when she handled cash for groceries or sorted through their mail. A new cheap surveillance camera appeared discreetly mounted in the hallway, ostensibly for security, but Anya knew its true purpose was to monitor their staff for any misstep, any perceived theft, any excuse to cut costs. The pressure was immense, a silent battle of wits where her very livelihood was at stake. She had to be flawless, beyond reproach, while simultaneously planning her escape. Her dreams of a small business and independence intensified, becoming less of a distant fantasy and more of an urgent necessity. She started researching more diligently, poring over business plans late into the night, using her old, cracked smartphone. She envisioned a life where she was beholden to no one, where her hard work directly benefited her and her family, not the crumbling facade of the Davies. The mansion, once a symbol of aspiration, now felt like a prison, its luxurious walls closing in on her. The air, once scented with expensive perfumes, now carried the faint, metallic tang of desperation and deceit. Anya knew she couldn't stay a moment longer than absolutely necessary. She needed a plan, a foolproof exit strategy that would leave the Davies with no leverage, no opportunity to drag her into their spiraling downfall. The quiet maid, once merely observant, was now a strategist, meticulously plotting her liberation from the golden cage. The urgency was palpable, a silent ticking clock counting down to her freedom, and the Davies' inevitable reckoning. The lottery ticket had been an impulse purchase, a fleeting moment of whimsy on a particularly draining day. Anya had bought it from a small kiosk on her way back from the market, a crumpled, brightly colored slip of paper that felt insignificant in her pocket. She had almost forgotten about it, tucked away amidst grocery lists and bus tickets, until a quiet evening when she was alone in her room, sorting through her belongings. The numbers blurred before her eyes as she cross-referenced them with the televised draw results. One by one they matched. Disbelief washed over her, then a tremor of excitement, followed quickly by a profound sense of calm. It wasn't just a win, it was a liberation. It was the key to unlock the golden cage. The sum was staggering, more money than she had ever dared to dream of, enough to secure not just her future, but generations of her family. The immediate urge to scream, to dance, to pack her bags and disappear into the night was almost overwhelming. But the image of the Davies, their desperate ploys, their surveillance camera, flashed in her mind. She knew better. A sudden departure would only confirm their suspicions, give them reason to investigate, to dig, to perhaps even try to stake a claim on her newfound fortune. No, she had to be smart. She had to be patient. Anya decided to keep her win an absolute secret. She carefully secured the ticket, researching the claiming process meticulously online, ensuring every step was discreet and untraceable back to the Davies' address. She continued her routine as if nothing had changed, moving through the mansion with the same quiet diligence, enduring the same curt commands and subtle deductions from her pay. The irony was almost unbearable. She was surrounded by their superficial wealth, enduring their petty tyrannies, all while holding the key to a fortune that dwarfed theirs. This secret power was intoxicating, empowering her to observe their unraveling with a detached, almost clinical eye. She saw their frantic attempts to secure new loans, their increasingly desperate arguments, their fear. And with each observation, her resolve hardened. She would not only escape, she would do so on her own terms, leaving them to face the consequences of their own making. The lottery win was not just money, it was freedom, justice, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing her true worth, a worth they could never comprehend. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Anya's secret lottery win remained her most potent weapon, a silent shield against the Davies' escalating desperation. She had meticulously planned her exit, securing a modest apartment in a different part of Lagos, far from the Davies' crumbling empire, and even quietly consulting with a financial advisor about sensible investments. Her notice was drafted, tucked away in her bag, ready to be delivered on the chosen day. She had even considered, in a moment of detached pity, offering them a small, anonymous sum of money, perhaps through a third party, to help them avert total disaster. Not out of kindness, but a desire for a clean break, a way to ensure their implosion didn't somehow entangle her further. She imagined leaving a carefully worded note, perhaps advising them to seek proper financial counsel, a final, almost benevolent gesture from the maid they so carelessly exploited. But before she could act on this fleeting impulse of generosity, the Davies made their move. One sweltering afternoon, a stern-faced courier arrived at the mansion's gate, not with a package, but with a legal summons. It was addressed to Anya. Her name, bold and accusatory, stared up at her from the official document. The Davies family was suing her. The accusations were a litany of fabricated lies, theft of household items, gross underperformance leading to financial losses, and a demand for repayment of years of overpaid wages. They had even inflated her meager salary on the document, painting a picture of a lavishly compensated employee who had somehow defrauded them. The audacity was breathtaking. Anya felt a cold wave of anger, quickly replaced by a quiet, almost amused, resolve. They had played right into her hands. Their desperation had blinded them, leading them to attack the very person who held the power to expose their entire charade. They believed she was a vulnerable maid, easily intimidated, easily crushed. They had no idea of the millions sitting in her newly opened, discreet offshore account. The thought of their shock, their utter disbelief, when the truth finally unraveled, was almost too satisfying to contemplate. The offer of help, the fleeting thought of a quiet exit, vanished. Now, it was no longer just about her freedom. It was about exposing their deceit, about a reckoning. The legal battle they had initiated would become the stage for their own dramatic downfall, orchestrated by the very person they sought to destroy. Anya calmly signed the receipt for the summons, her face betraying no emotion, a silent promise of the storm that was about to break. The courtroom hummed with a low murmur of anticipation. The Davies, impeccably dressed as always, sat with an air of confident arrogance, their faces a mask of righteous indignation. Their lawyer, a sharp-suited man with a condescending smirk, presented their case with theatrical flair, painting Anya as a deceitful, ungrateful employee who had exploited their generosity. He presented fabricated ledgers, doctored inventory lists, and even a grainy, distorted image from the hallway surveillance camera, attempting to portray Anya in the worst possible light. Mr. Davies nodded solemnly, while Mrs. Davies dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the part of the aggrieved employer to perfection. They believed they had this case won. Anya, a simple maid with no visible resources, would be crushed, their financial woes momentarily alleviated by a forced settlement. Anya sat calmly beside her own lawyer, a quiet but astute woman she had hired through a discreet recommendation. Her demeanor was composed, almost serene, a stark contrast to the Davies' performative outrage. When it was her turn, her lawyer began, not by refuting every petty accusation, but by presenting a different narrative entirely. She started with a detailed account of the Davies' actual financial state, backed by irrefutable evidence Anya had meticulously gathered over months. Bank statements showing massive debts, overdue utility bills, bounce checks, and even records of foreclosed properties. The Davies shifted uncomfortably, their faces paling. Then came the crescendo. Anya's lawyer presented the undisputed proof of her lottery win. A certified letter from the Lottery Commission, bank statements showing the multi-million naira deposit, and official documentation of her legitimate claim. The courtroom gasped. Mr. Davies's jaw dropped, his face turning a sickly shade of green. Mrs. Davies's silk handkerchief fell from her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The lawyer, with a flourish, then revealed the full extent of Mr. Davies's secret surveillance, including the incidental recording of Anya buying the winning lottery ticket, which he had mistakenly dismissed as a losing scratch-off, leading to his ill-conceived lawsuit. The irony was brutal, devastating. The judge, initially stern, now looked at the Davies with a mixture of pity and contempt. Their entire facade had not just crumbled, it had been obliterated in a single, undeniable revelation. They had sought to ruin a maid for a few thousand naira, only to discover she was wealthier than they had ever pretended to be. The case was dismissed, and the Davies were left not just with their crushing debts exposed to the public, but with the profound humiliation of having their desperate, malicious scheme backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. Anya walked out of the courtroom, not with a triumphant smirk, but with a quiet dignity, finally free from the golden cage, ready to embrace a future she had earned, a future far brighter than the one the Davies had ever known.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, you may never see us again. Subscribe now and turn on post notification for our next story.